Hello and welcome to our session today. So for the eagle-eyed amongst you, what you will notice is I'm about to give an introduction and then there's going to be a rough cut into our first speaker's presentation and proceed straight on from there. I foolishly forgot to start the recording for this session, but to make sure it's available for you all online, I'm doing a quick introduction here and then we'll cut to the original take from the session. So in this session, we were talking to Mia Hesselgren and Carly McLachlan about their working with local authorities and communities to foster sustainable cities. So this is part of our series on social change beyond consumerism, where we're looking particularly at professional practices and practices beyond the kind of ordinary practices of consumption that most of us will usually focus on. So it's bringing these kind of intermediary roles into the foreground and thinking about how we work differently with different people in different roles with different practices to foster sustainable consumption. So our speakers today, first we will have Mia Hesselgren, and then we'll follow that with Carly McLachlan. So what I will do is I will introduce both speakers. Here I'm going to introduce Mia, so you get to hear the introduction that I gave on the day, and then we will cut to Mia's presentation. I'll then give an introduction to Carly, as I did at that time, and we'll continue with the recorded seminar. So Mia's an assistant professor in industrial design engineering at KTH Royal Institute of Technology in Stockholm, Sweden. Her research aims to look at how we can support and shape sustainability transitions. So it's transdisciplinary, and it uses collaborative design methods to think about engaging with other research disciplines, citizens, and stakeholders in lots of different spaces. So her talk today is going to be looking at the use of designerly living labs, and specifically we're exploring how sustainable citizenship can be promoted and engaged with through living labs. So this approach engages participants as co-researchers in longitudinal research projects. And Mitra is going to be talking to us today about the Mistra SAMS project as a designerly living lab, which was set up and implemented in 2023. I won't say more than that. I will steal no thunder from Mia, who hopefully, as we cut now, we'll get into Mia's talk from the day.
So I will tell you a little bit about the research program, Mistra SAMS, how we've gone about the collaborative design process and the sort of exploring and engaging processes that we've done, you could say. Okay, next slide. Nay, there we go, I think. Yes, Mistra SAMS research program is a 4+4 year research program. So we are now actually in its 8th year. And Mistra is the Swedish funder. SAMS is short for Sustainable Accessibility and Mobility Services. And we have really set this up as a transdisciplinary research program with a learning focus to learn about future sustainable mobility and changing towards future sustainable mobility for transport systems. The figure here on the right describes this sort of transdisciplinary research setup where I am work package leader of Living Lab, which is what we've set here in the middle of everything. You see that you have an LL3 there. So living labs being explored from a citizen perspective, from a policy actor perspective, and a market actor perspective. So those are 3 other work packages that have been where we've sort of used the living lab to do some of those research activities, and then followed by a work package synthesizing and another work package sort of bringing this into sustainable futures. It should really be more sort of a future-oriented thing. We call this little illustration the snail, the escargot or something here. It's been really challenging to be in such transdisciplinary research setting because we are researchers coming from very different disciplines, as well as what we're trying to do is that we are engaging policy actors such as a municipality and the region of Stockholm. We are engaging with market actors in terms of different service providers, and we are engaging with citizens. And we are acknowledging that building knowledge about sustainable, possible future sustainable mobility, we need the knowledge from also those people, not just us within academia can build such knowledge. And in this final 4-year phase, we are based in an area that's called Riksten. Riksten is a semi-urban area south of the city of Stockholm. And you see a photo of this area on the left here and the planning on the right side. This is a quite newly built area, still sort of being developed. And it's situated 2 kilometers uphill from a commuter train station, you could say. So it's very, in the context here, this municipality, they want the area they have ideas of making this an area where you could live a sustainable lifestyle type of thing in some sort of languages. But then did this really work? Well, while exploring, I can give a heads up here that no, it didn't really work. It's super difficult for people living in this semi-urban area to start living a sustainable lifestyle because we are in so many different structures. And we knew this, you could say. We knew that this would be very difficult to engage in sustainable mobility practices just in this area. And we picked the area because it is quite typical of many places around in Sweden. Semi-urban places are very car dependent sort of places to live. And I'm sure that also you out in different places in Europe, you could sort of recognize this as well. So in our process of establishing the Living Lab, and I talked a little bit about this when some of us met in the Netherlands, in Wageningen, we tried to frame and reframe how to organize, how to establish a living lab that is going to be at the center of a whole research program. And you could say that there's at least a 1 or maybe even a 1.5 year process of discussing what is it that we're going to do in the living lab in Riksten. And we came to sort of arriving at this I would say March 2022 somehow. And you can see we started somewhere like February 2021. But then maybe we could say that we decided sort of what to do to then be able to concretize and really start establishing. So I sort of drew on a double diamond design process or a service design loop using triggers and new interactions to get to what is this living lab. And we've used it as a co-design process and done. Yes, it is a bit difficult to see here, Claire. These are small images, and it's sort of deliberate because I just want to give you a flavor of working in this establishment. There were a lot of interactions with both the different researchers, transport researchers, social science researchers, design researchers, and business business model researchers, you could say, together with also the municipality and the service providers, etc. But we tried to sort of work and engage with them with different workshop materials to at the end sort of come to establishing something. And I want to bring up this is from Sanders and Stapper sort of discussions of different ways of doing co-design, where I'm not sure it's actually in the book that I'm referencing here that we see the word transition design, but when Liz was presenting back here in Stockholm, she sort of added transition design in that corner of this is about engaging, so designing for engagement. But I would say that we've also we are stretching this engaging to also provoke, because what we try to do with our living labs is that we are trying to explore future prototypes, you could say. So this is an illustration from one of my colleagues, Martin, who's also worked in this project. And to some way, you could say that, okay, so we envision a future where sustainable mobility services are part of a neighborhood, that green future that you see towards the right of this image. So we envision that in the future, mobility services such as shared bikes or shared electric scooters or shared electric box bikes, etc. And what we said here is that these shared bikes of various kinds, they would be in the future subsidized in the same way as public transport is subsidized. In the Stockholm region, you could say public transport is subsidized with about half. So you pay sort of half of what it's actually worth. So we said that's what we want to explore. So then we take that future of a subsidized shared mobility, and we put it into today's context, which is this gray semi-urban context here, because today is quite gray, we can see. But we put this green little piece into today's context, and what we know is that we're gonna hit a lot of structures. We're gonna hit barriers and challenges, because this gray structure of today's semi-urban context has all that. So it's not so much about like trying to explore this living lab in terms of testing something and scaling it up, because it's not going to really scale up because you're like hitting all these walls. So it's more about learning what are all these challenges. What are the challenges and the barriers and the difficulties? So how can we then, to learn that, how could we then possibly start to make this green, or the transition from that gray space into a future green space? So it's like a backcasting and then a future, but I'm not sure. We haven't quite worked out what to call this yet, except that we call it exploring future prototypes somehow. So what we tested basically is this digital platform that we call Samsas. Samsas in Swedish sort of means collaborating, which was a bit fun when we discovered that, and it worked well with that. We were called Sams. So we have this digital platform to share these different bikes. You see the digital app there on the left-hand side. And we also engaged 14 co-researchers. So co-researchers in different households in this particular area to share their experiences. And one thing that we decided to do was to send challenges on this digital little app. We also gave them challenges to provoke the co-researchers to start to reflect on, for example, their car usage. And we also asked them to actually set a goal for how they could halve their car usage. So you see that in red, it says 9 car trips left. However, they could like experiment with this themselves, and when they didn't reach their goal, they simply just adjusted their goals. So it was not like a hard provocation, you could say. And then what we did was that we built a little bike shed. We kept it for a year. We sort of tested throughout the autumn and the winter time, which can be quite different in Sweden. Not only do we have snow, and you can see here, but it's quite dark. And darkness is sort of an aspect of cycling, and in the spring and the summertime as well. So we tested here these different services, and I can talk quite a lot about this, but what I thought I would just point out is that what we found then is that the services that were offered, and this is basically, I just have like this graphic slide here now to tell you a little bit about some findings. So the graphics, no, the services that were offered, you cannot say that they got integrated in these people's, the 14 co-researcher household. They did not get integrated in their everyday lives. Because the co-researchers, they choose not to stop doing their everyday activities and to do lifestyle changes. That was sort of out of the question, really, even though they are all they all have an attitude, you could say, or maybe some sort of willingness. They are happy to talk about how they would like to live more sustainably or travel more sustainably. But then when it comes to realizing your everyday activities, to take that leap, being located in this semi-urban context, that is really like a big blockage, sort of, and especially when it comes to activities related to their children. So being a good parent in Sweden, like parenthood in this context, that means that you let your children have a lot of different free time activities. And we are talking about lots of sports activities, doing basket dancing, but also circus or playing the guitar, etc. And these are distributed all over. So there is this place for sports activities. So for football, hockey, and tennis, which is only 800 meters down the road. But that's like those three activities is not what people of Riksten, that's not enough for them, you could say. So they engage in many different activities all around, and these are very car dependent with the structure that we have here. When we then talk to the co-researchers, and one of the challenges they got actually in the app during the year was to give a suggestion to the municipality for a new transport or a new traffic, I don't know what the English word is, the correct word, but like new traffic planning strategy. What would you suggest? We then brought that, so with like this integration of working with the different actors, we have done a workshop with the municipality. So bringing the learnings from these co-researchers and the citizen perspective, what do the co-researchers suggest for new traffic planning in this area? We've also brought it to the market actors, to the providers of these services, and so we bring the findings out to the various perspectives. And when we talk about it, this sort of with the co-researchers, they quite obviously, you could say, they suggest more vehicles added to the services. They suggest a higher frequency of public transport, but they also start to discuss it at a higher level, suggesting better infrastructure for cycling, kind of obviously, that always comes up, but also at the level of what could the school do to support less cars bringing the kids to school, for example. So we are now in the sort of finalizing the writing things up in this research program. And one of the things that I think is interesting is this co-researcher role that's sort of happened to come about, and as a way for them to get to engage. And we see some examples of how, for example, two of the co-researchers, they decided to go to a municipality meeting to really declare the voice. I'm not sure that, or we think, but we haven't got research data, but we think that we might have inspired them to talk about sort of what is it to be able to be a sustainable citizen here in the Riksten area. But we haven't concluded those findings yet. But I think I'll stop there with a little thank you. and I'm ready for some clarification questions or some questions.
Thank you ever so much, Mia. That was fascinating. I guess I will give other people the opportunity to ask questions. Who's got a question for us? I'm going to jump in while people think of their questions because I have many. I am going to take chair's privilege. I'm not even going to ask Lenike. Lenike, I'll come straight to you afterwards. So I'm fascinated by your co-researchers. I think this is really interesting and something that kind of resonates with a lot of work that many of us do, but perhaps I've not seen that term being used before. So I wondered if you could tell us a little bit more about who were they, how did they get involved, and what did they do? What was the kind of nature of their involvement in the project?
So when to recruit them, we posted flyers, physical flyers actually in the area, and at some stage we actually went around in a specific area, part of the area where when we had decided this is where we're going to build the bike shed, we focused on the southeast corner. So we went around putting flyers in where we could in their mailboxes, also posting stuff on Facebook and that. One of the research groups, they have access to doing stuff with the sort of recruiting through social media. So and with that, we also got a big or a survey out with a bit more than 100 answers, to which we've used in other parts of the research program that I didn't go into. And there was also the possibility to say, yes, I'm interested in being part. And we tried then to get some sort of representation in terms of different types of housing. I didn't go into that, but this area actually has both it has many different types of housing. So we tried to get through that, and we wanted to get some that were actually living without car, and we had one, but she dropped out. So we had 15, but then we didn't get through to her. So this, I can't really say that it's like a fantastic representation, and they are engaged in sustainability for various reasons. So now let me say, what were you more asking? How did we get to them? Who were they?
Do, I guess, tangibly,
Sorry.
how did they participate in the research?
How did they participate? Okay, so they they said, yes, I'm part of this, and they put a signature on the paper to say that I'm okay by being researched upon, you could say. And when they did that, they did get a little bit of money, a few €100 or pounds, to spend on, for example, biking equipment. They were free to do that, and that was interesting to follow up what they bought. So they did get like a little material incentive, you could say, but it's not like they paid for it, but something to support a biking practice, you could say. And then they downloaded the app. They responded to the monthly challenges, so sort of monthly. In some months, we actually had 2 different challenges, and they were asked to use the services. The first month, which was like in November, so not fantastic weather conditions, they were for free. But after that, they had to pay this half cost of like a fictive subsidy. So then they had to pay for that. We have met them in interviews, so they had to be interviewed. So I've interviewed them before we started, and then during in sort of April period, and then we interviewed them after closing. And we've also had 2 events in the beginning and at the end in this park, when they talked to each other and shared their tips of what to do in Riksten, for example.
Fascinating. This is very interesting. We have quite a similar experiment going on at the moment with one of our partner organizations, Possible. So we should catch up as well. Lenneke, I'll come to you, and then Carly, I'll come to you, and then we're going to hand over to Carly again to speak. Go on, Lenneke.
Yeah, I think my question, I have lots of questions too, but I would like to hand over to Carly because some of it was already covered in your questions.
Carly, a question from you?
Yeah, so you mentioned that there were things that people were just, there were changes that were sort of out of the question, and so people just didn't do them. And I suppose it's probably things they were already doing that they felt were more sustainable. I just wonder if there was any shift in the middle, did you manage to stretch what people considered doing, or was it very much that they stayed kind of in their existing pattern, if that makes sense?
Okay, I can see some examples of a bit of both sort of, we have, so it's difficult to say. I'm not ready to sort of argue that this living lab, engaging in this living lab has changed people's behavior or that they changed their lifestyle. I don't think I'm going to be able to ever say that. But I can see some examples of them reflecting more. And partly to have this learning focus is sort of them, these co-researchers. So I'm in the research program, in this escargot type of the citizen bubble. Looking for change in the citizen is one of the 3 change perspectives, and we're also looking at the municipality to engage in their transformative capacity and the market actors to start providing more, maybe you could call it sustainable business models, I don't know. But then if we stay in the citizen bubble, how do you engage in sustainable citizenship? And I think that the example that I just briefly mentioned, that after we had the event of when we sort of closed the living lab, there was the municipality opened up had a conversation about what's going to happen in Riksten, future development. And 2 of our co-researchers, they decided to participate and sort of raise their voices about minimizing cars in this Riksten area, you could say. So maybe, and when I've talked to one of them, for example, I know that this person's been saying that you doing this type of research legitimize my thinking. I feel more sort of, I don't know, not empowered, but he's an engineer working at Scania in Södertälje, very engineering but he calls himself a nerd, and but he's really into cycling. So he's been saying but with you doing this research, I don't feel as much of a cycling nerd. I know I'm right now, type of thing, if that makes sense. I'm not sure I'm using exactly the right words now, but yeah.
Thanks.
So I think that we can see some sort of, you see some seeds for change within some of these. And my thinking of doing this event in the park is that we would like to see that these 14 households out of about 1,000 sort of in there, that could start to be a community of a more car-free practice. And some of the co-researchers start to talk like that also. Like now I want to go and talk to the headmaster of the school, and we should really go for doing more stuff here at the school level. We should talk to how all these cars in the area affect our children as one way in. I don't know if that answered your question, but
Thanks.
Wow, it's such an interesting project. Thank you ever so much, Mia. We'll come back at the end to have a kind of conversation together about about anything we want to have a conversation about, really. But for now, I will hand over to Carly. So Carly is a professor in climate change and energy policy at the University of Manchester and director of the Tyndall Centre for Climate Change Research, where I'm also based. And Carly's going to talk to us about a project with Greater Manchester Combined Authority, which is part of our ESRC Centre for Climate Change and Social Transformation. So this is looking at accelerating and kind of enabling climate action in local authorities. And again, I will steal no more of your thunder and allow you to take it away, Carly.
Thanks. Can you see my screen okay?
The slides are perfect.
Okay, great. Well, thanks very much for inviting me. Yeah, I'm going to talk a bit about our work on accelerating climate action at the city region scale. The centre that I think you probably already know a bit about through Claire. This work's been done as part of CAST, which is a Centre for Climate Change and Social Transformation. And that's a sister centre to Tyndall, which Claire and I are both part of as well. And it has a number of kind of principles that I think are quite important for our project. So that it places people at the heart of climate action. And so not in a way that's like, you know, engaging citizens or engaging consumers in what they buy, which is often the kind of place that they're often put in that framing, but actually that I would argue, every single thing you're going to do about tackling climate change has people involved in it in some way. And that goes across all of these layers that we've got there on the right-hand side from, yes, there's things about at the individual level and the community level, but also right up through organisations, city regions, and the national and international. You know, people are still innately involved in all of the decisions about, you know, what to consider you might do, decisions about which things you actually do, how you involve people in those, and then the impacts of those things as well. And then we also are interested in both direct and indirect emissions reductions in the centre. So that's just to give a little bit of framing. In terms of why we then look at cities and local governments, well, I'm sure that this isn't news to you, but they've become kind of increasingly prominent, the sort of subnational actors in global climate actions. You see that local authorities have a clear need to mitigate and adapt and to do that together, because they're at a place where these things are happening at the same time or are impacting each other perhaps over different timescales. In the UK, over 3/4 of local authorities have declared a climate emergency. So their kind of big rhetoric and target stuff is there, along with the kind of importance of co-benefits of climate action. So the idea that, you know, we might want to take a slightly more holistic view to particularly spread very limited budgets to do as much as we can for climate by saying, actually, how could we meet other goals that the local authorities have at the same time, so that actually the climate goals can be being delivered partly by budgets from other places because you've designed a project that also works for health, for example. So although they've got these big targets, local authorities, there are, you know, all over the place, there are gaps in actually delivering that. So, and that for us, one of the areas we focused on was about decision making within local authorities. So sort of within the local council level, if you like, that subnational level. Carbon is often part of the sort of express decision making in the sense that, you know, it's very important, it's a strategic priority, but there's not a clear pathway to how that's assessed. And in some authorities that we looked at the beginning of this work, so we looked at 3 authorities in the UK, even where there were policies and processes in place to assess carbon in particular, there were just loads of gaps where people could say, oh yeah, that doesn't affect us. So one of the things we found in Manchester was that, you know, there were just a vast number of projects that just ticked not applicable for carbon. And worryingly, these were disproportionately projects about transport and buildings, which of course, you know, you can't do a transport or building project without it having an impact on climate, either positive or negative. So we felt like that was something that it was worth addressing. So we worked really closely with Greater Manchester Combined Authority. Now that is the city centre of Manchester, the City of Manchester, but it is also 9 other authorities that sit around it to make up Greater Manchester. And we had a working group across different departments with different expertise. We reviewed these previous decisions around these inequalities and carbon questions, and that's where we found this sort of gap of things not being covered. And we really wanted to explore with them how the co-benefits of climate action could be better embedded. We reviewed literature, looked at other tools for this kind of work, and we went through GM Greater Manchester strategy documents to identify objectives across all of their priority areas. So, you know, I am a climate change person mainly, but we are trying to say, actually, we need to sit this in this wider context of all of these priorities that the local authority has, because for some elected officials and for some sort of policymaker, civil servant type people, it's not their main priority, carbon. They've got something else to do around health or around economy. So it's trying to get to a position where we can kind of talk across these areas more effectively. So we developed a carbon and co-benefits decision support tool that combined a number of different areas that I'll talk to you about in a second. We piloted and reviewed that with the combined authority, and it's now adopted in like their strategic plan as a way of working. So it should be applied to all decisions that go to the elected combined authority for a decision. This process has to have been completed, has to be reported. And there's a wonderful woman in governance called Julie, who won't allow your project to go forwards to that committee unless it's been completed. And people like Julie are very important in these sorts of processes. We've also worked with Greater London Authority to make a slightly different, but the same sort of rough idea tool for them that they're just about to start using. And we've been working with Flintshire County Council in Wales, so sort of different scales, so that we can compare and contrast across those. So what does the tool look like? It has these various impact areas. You might call them co-benefit areas, but impact was decided upon in this work with the combined authority. They preferred that term. So it covers equalities, health, resilience and adaptation, housing, economy, mobility and connectivity, carbon, nature and environment, consumption and production. And then they have to write a bit of text about how they're contributing to the local area carbon target, which for Greater Manchester is zero carbon by 2038, which they are not on track to meet. The simple carbon assessment is then a slightly more complicated bit. And again, I suppose, as I said before, I'm a carbon and a climate person. So we were coming from a climate change research centre, and we dealt with carbon slightly differently in the tool. And again, this was through working with our working group, because carbon and energy was seen as more technically demanding, in the sense that people felt that they themselves could assess whether something was good for the local economy, for example, but they were struggling with saying sort of what was good and what was not so good against carbon. So what happens in the carbon part is, although we ask questions and they give an answer, and then the tool itself gives you a rating, whereas in that first part, the impact part, you're rating it basically from very positive to very negative yourself. It's designed to support decisions, so it'll flag where decisions about trade-offs have to be made. There's no averaging and there's no quantitative scores. So things can't be hidden, if you like. You can't have one really bad, but because everything else is really good, it comes out okay overall and nobody needs to know about this impact. The idea is it's meant to sort of increase transparency, surface these challenges, and then make it for the elected officials and the civil servants to say, we can do more to mitigate there, or look, not everything can be win-win. Sometimes there has to be a negative impact, and we're gonna acknowledge that. It encourages, you could set it up to mandate this, a narrative or commentary from the person filling it in, the officer filling it in, to explain, if they've got a kind of amber rating or a red rating, why that is the case, and they might give some justification of that. So this is just to give you a sense of what it looks like. So here's the questions about the economy. You get a filter at the top here that's like whether it will affect the economy. You can see the questions as default so that you can have a look and say, oh yeah, I think it is going to affect some of them, so I'll say yes. Then you fill it out and you get this RAG rating, this red, amber, green rating. And as I say, all these questions were derived from going through the key policy documents of Greater Manchester. A similar one for health. I'm just really giving you a sense of what it looks like rather than the sense that you can read all of these. But you've got questions there about the physical health as well as the mental health and well-being and things like that. Social isolation, a big priority for Greater Manchester as well, tackling that. Whereas here's an example of a question around carbon, which is rather than just having these sort of directional questions, there's some that are very specific, like state the energy performance certificate of the building. Will you meet or exceed this standard? Are you inserting a gas-based heating system? So here, for example, if you're building a new building and you're putting gas central heating into it, which you can do under the law in Britain, but completely, I would say, at odds with all the sorts of things we say as an area about what we want and what the future is. Then you get a black result, which is bad, and you then would have to justify that in the through the sort of wider decision-making process. And I'll come back to this, but that's caused quite a lot of tension, that one in particular. Okay, so the output that you get looks something like this. So you get a rating against these different areas. The rating for carbon is on a different color scheme, and that's to really let decision makers know that something different's happening there. We have decided the rating for that, whereas the one above is decided by the user. These are just some examples of them kind of filled out. So this would be a really good one filled out with them explaining each bit of it so that the decision maker gets all of this together for when they're looking at the document, and the same zoomed in on a carbon one there. Okay, the other thing that we've done is we've made an online version of the tool that we're just about to trial with a couple of authorities. Our intention is to make this all freely available and let local authorities use it if they would like to. We're just going to try it with a few first in case we locate any sort of bugs in it. But the idea is that this will be a bit prettier to engage with. And also Excel's been quite problematic to get past people's firewalls. Again, some of the challenges of doing this kind of work. So getting towards the end now, responses to the first phase of the tool. Well, people talked about the balance between, we decided to put this in right at the end of the process. So just as a proposal is going to elected officials for a decision. Now, obviously, that is not where you would put it if you were designing the most effective system. You'd put it right at the beginning when all of the ideas were open and people didn't have as many vested interests, they hadn't sunk as much cost. But coming back to Julie, that's where Julie could make sure it absolutely happened through the governance process. And what's interesting is users are then saying, we want it pulled further up the chain. And there's now work going on to sort of support that. So it was always our intention to do that, but users identified that they wanted that as well. They also said that they need both help with filling it in, so support, but they also want challenge. Like if they say it's good, they want somebody to say, well, actually, is it good? We think it could be better. So that requires more resource in the environment team, but also in other teams, so that people have got someone to go to and say, look, I've filled this out for my project, but look, I'm not an expert on mental health. So could somebody help me with what the best practice is here? Multi-project programs were a bit tricky for people to assess. They found it a bit singular. And there was a lot of chat about, well, I couldn't possibly know that yet. I don't have as much sympathy for the idea that you can't know it, because I think what you should be doing is, if you don't know it by the time you're getting like a yes from elected officials, you should be setting the parameters of what's acceptable. So saying that you don't know whether you put in a gas boiler, for example, I think that should get you the most negative mark, because you probably are going to put it in if you're not sure that you're not going to put it in at that point. So that's caused some sort of tension, but I actually think it's a good feature of the tool, as long as there's kind of buy-in from the wider organisation for it. So demonstrating how the outputs are received and used, I don't think we've nailed that. I don't think we've done that perfectly yet. We need that senior leadership sort of showing that actually this tool being completed in this way has led to a delay or a change, or, you know, like that people actually want to see things changing as a result of it. And I don't think we've quite completed that loop yet. And that links to this need to embed it in culture and priorities. So there's quite a lot of work going on in those areas at the moment in Greater Manchester Combined Authority, and the tool is part of the discussions. So this is my last slide. So just thinking a bit more about kind of what I would take away from all of this. I mean, that top message there is really where it's at, that a tool in and of itself, which will come as no surprise to you, doesn't really sort things out. It might be a necessary but not sufficient condition to create change. It needs that organizational culture to really come along behind it. So there's felt at times to be a kind of conflict or misalignment between these high level ambitions on climate and carbon, and then there's sort of routine decision making and planning on the ground, in particular in Manchester, the pressure to build houses versus the commitment to being net zero. Balancing the traditional or core priorities of the Directorate with sustainable priorities. So get those houses built as quickly as possible, as cheaply as possible, make them affordable, compared to a kind of premium for a net zero in operation house. That is a tension. A lack of resources or data to fully understand, address and track sustainability issues is relevant to the Directorate. So some directorates, so different, different functions within the authority saying to us, they need a bit more support, like they're on board, but they're just not quite sure how to measure it and how to know what the best thing to do is. External factors came up a lot. So there's a perspective that the market isn't ready to deliver, in particular, these zero carbon and operation homes. We could discuss whether we think that's right. And accountability and responsibility for delivering carbon. So really making sure that senior leaders, officers, and external stakeholders understand what their role is and are held to account on it. I don't think we have that quite right yet. But interestingly, finishing on a sort of positive, Greater Manchester has just signed a trailblazer deal to have more powers devolved to it from national government. And within that, there is going to be increased scrutiny. So there is the potential for carbon to come kind of higher up the agenda there and be sort of tested in a more transparent way there. So yeah, that's it from me. Very happy to chat. Thanks.
Fabulous. Thank you ever so much for that. It's amazing working as closely as I do with Carly, how little of that I already knew. So it's always exciting to hear more. Would anyone like to kick us off with a question? Yes, Anna, straight away with a hand there.
Thanks. Yes, really, really interesting and kind of quite a lot of similarities with my experiences in Ireland here. We certainly have similar challenges around competing demands for housing and the tensions between that kind of drive for administrative efficiency in already bureaucratic, slow systems to create a process where essentially we're saying it needs to be slow in order to provide the support and the resources for all the actors involved in making that procedural change. So even if the tool is the kind of catalyst for that, as you were saying, it's much broader than that. So just in some senses, just to say, it's nice from my side to hear that there are similar challenges going on and discussions going on at that scale. What you seem to have is that leadership at the higher level, which is essential. We perhaps don't have that in a Dublin context, particularly at the moment. And so my question is how do you even start a process like the one you're engaged in without that kind of progressive, even if it's slightly greenwashing, motherhood and apple pie and all that. Yeah, so I'd just like your thoughts on that.
Oh, that's really interesting. I mean, I think the carbon and co-benefits angle has helped bring in more people. So it's not been felt to be like something for the environment team to do. But that's kind of helped right from the beginning, that people are like, oh, this seems to be something a bit broader. And then particularly when we've said oh, well, we're making this tool and there's some questions in it that relate to your area of work. Do you want to see them? And when we started, everyone was like, oh, this is far too long. It's got far too many questions, typical academics. And little do they know we'd already taken about 80% out of what we wanted to put in. But then when they got into their own questions, everybody just wanted to make their own bits longer, obviously, because once you know the detail, you kind of want to make sure you're getting at the right stuff. So I think that helped get that wider buy-in. I think it is a challenge if you don't have that senior level thing to say, we want this thing, to make it something that we have. And so there, I suppose, if it was me, I might do the working with individual directorates who actually want to do something and get some wins chalked up on the board of things that you've done that are good, to build that sort of sense that this is actually a positive thing where we can make a difference. If you're, then I'll just keep going until I find an open one. So and we've done loads of stuff at those other levels before we had to go at this. And to be honest, when I went into this project, I thought we would do a project with the environment team because that's where my strongest connections are. And they were like, no, let's do it. Let's go big. Let's go right across the organization. But I also think it's something that authorities are feeling a pressure to have. So one of the reasons Greater London were so open to us working with them was they had been told they had to have a way to do this by a certain date. And we just happened to arrive at a moment that was like, we've got this thing, do you want to try this? And they needed something to fill that gap. So I suppose it's, just pushing at the doors you find
great.
ajar.
I mean, I'd be really interested. Have you published anything on this, or is there anything that we could look?
This is the problem with the co-design. It's taken so long to do this that the papers are really slow.
Do let us know.
So they are.
Yeah,
there
when
are
it does come out.
Yeah, I will. There are a number in development, so I'll let you know.
Certainly interested in promoting similar kind of approach. Obviously, different contexts and different regulatory contexts now, Brexit and everything. But we'd be very interested. And like you say, that moment of impact with London, you just were in the right place, right time.